Okay, council, I think we're going to get started here. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to call our work session to order. And David, we're going to move straight into our presentation from TCU with President Pullen because I know that they have got other places to go that I think they're already late for. We apologize for that, Daniel. So I don't know if a city staff member is going to kick this off, if we're going straight into Daniel's presentation.
Yeah, just really quick, Mayor and Council, as you know, we have a number of outstanding institutions here in Fort Worth. We're blessed in that way. The oldest standing institution here is TCU. And we're blessed today to have Dr. Pullen here to give us an update on a lot of the economic impact and benefits that TCU brings to our community. So without further ado, Dr. Pullen.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah, I wear purple tennis shoes every day. I do it for a few reasons. First of all, I take a lot of steps on campus because I try not to be in my office. I try to be on campus with our students, with our faculty, with our world-class staff, and so many visitors that come to campus, and by virtue of that, Fort Worth. So it's an honor to have a chance to say thank you, which is really my intention. Thank you for being such a great partner in the city of Fort Worth's success. Thank you for doing that for over 100 years. And thank you for dreaming with us just a little bit as we work really hard to make this great place, and by this great place, I mean TCU, and I mean Fort Worth, even greater. So I've got a few slides. I'll try to go through them just a bit. We do have a long shared history. This is our campus on its university in 1910. We had about 400 students at that time. We now have about 13,000 students. And in a forthcoming strategic plan, we're modeling a student population of up to 18,000 students. So you'll see most likely even more Horned Frogs than ever before, making an impact both intellectually and economically. And hopefully we'll continue to have a great partnership and a collaboration where their place of choice is to stay in Fort Worth, Texas, and be a big part of our workforce solutions. A lot of great things are happening. We have outstanding placement rates. We have an all-time high in our persistence rate, which is just jargon for moving from your freshman to sophomore year without dropping out at 94%. We hit an all-time high graduation rate of 85%. We're modeling moving to 90% in the coming years. We're very, very thrilled to have that. Of all Texas universities, the only one that got an A+ rating from Forbes for the financial health and sustainability was Texas Christian University. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of that's the great stewardship of our amazing team, a number of whom are here today. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being prudent stewards of the funds that you are entrusted. Not unlike a city council, a mayor, a city manager. Thank you for doing the same as part of our long-term and lasting success. Part of that is because we have generous donors and alums. We just passed over 100,000 living alumni, many of which are right here in Fort Worth. And Horned Frogs give back. Horned Frogs engage. They want to see their university thrive. And by virtue of that, the great partnership with the city of Fort Worth, Texas. We're also very proud that they are gainfully employed. They continue to build careers in the context of life and have the financial degrees of freedom to provide that philanthropy that has now resulted in an endowment of nearly $2.8 billion, which helps offset some of our operating costs. We're proud of our business school. We're proud of the fact that 80% of our students have internships by the time they graduate. That means they have real-world experience, many cases with companies and nonprofits and other great civic organizations right here in Fort Worth. They can see the power of what a well-educated college graduate can mean beyond just themselves, to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they can see that before they graduate. So we're not just trading tuition and fees for credit hours and diplomas. In many ways, we're preparing something more than a college graduate. We're talking about a knowledge-driven, citizen-based leader that can make a lasting impact. A lot of other things are going on. We have the happiest students in the country, 2 of the last 3 years. And this year, once again, our campus was voted among the top 20. We'll talk a little bit about where we're going in a second, but already this is a snapshot of last year's economic impact. I love the fact that 1.3 billion of our 2.1 stayed right here in Fort Worth. So in many ways, we are an economic catalyst. We are hopefully a very strong partner in our community's success. We drive job growth, we drive tax revenue. And as we think ahead, as we think about how we might scale the excellence and the opportunity, part and parcel with, as we know, the country's fastest growing major metro of over 250,000 people, we do have a shared opportunity to grow together and to grow in a beautiful way that enriches our community and allows all of our citizens to flourish. Athletics, we had a big win this weekend. Thank you for those of you recognizing that we're continuing to bring people, tourists, parents, spend money in hotels and restaurants and on and on and on. Last year, over $400 million of impact right here in Fort Worth. Many of you know that we have recently opened the Burnett School of Medicine in the near South Side neighborhood. We're excited to contribute to a different zip code in Fort Worth and broaden our impact beyond our traditional campus home. So far, so good. Even in the early years, we've just graduated 2 classes. We just opened the beautiful building, Arnold Hall, that was, again, a great philanthropic opportunity from one of our trustees, Greg Arnold. And it's already having a multiplier effect in jobs, economic impact, and on and on and on. Neely School of Business, many of you are hiring School of Business interns and graduates, so thank you for that. Near perfect placement rates, top 10 starting salaries of any business school at the undergraduate level in the country. Last year, it was the #1 average starting salary of an undergraduate business school in Texas. So the value of the degree has a lot to do with the engagement with the community. The fact that our students are getting internships, they're broadening their network with leaders like yourselves. Thank you for investing in their success on the business side of what we do. We're also a net importer of talent. So we are a majority out-of-state university, given the national brand that TCU has acquired over the last particularly 20 years. But over half of our students stay right here in Texas. So as we scale, I think we can have more of an impact in the much-needed workforce solutions that are oftentimes discussions of this council and others. And then last year, we had a record number of applications, over 22,000 applications for only 2,400 first-year spots, right? So it allows us to be selective, but it also tells me that we're leaving a lot of talent on the table, a lot of talent that could be drawn right here to Fort Worth, Texas. So as we think about where might we go, I think we need to solve that issue where we're not able to bring in talented people that could be successful in our rigorous curriculum, that could fall in love with Fort Worth, Texas, right, and help move all of our futures forward. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to expand our campus. Our trustees recently approved at their April meeting an all-new campus master plan that has the ability for us to nearly double the amount of square footage in our traditional campus when combined with our Burnett School of Medicine. It will be an awesome opportunity for us to think about how might we partner with our neighborhoods. Right? And thank you, Councilperson Beck, Councilperson Crane, for your support of what we're trying to do. Thank you for bridging the opportunity for us to continue to work with and strengthen our neighborhoods that abut our campuses, now both of them. We're really focused on adding flexibility to academic life, how we get around the campus from a mobility perspective. We're committed to partnerships and collaborations on collective landscapes and green spaces. And of course, creating a safe and secure residential life for our students and a safe and secure campus for all of the citizenry that has the opportunity to participate at Texas Christian University. There are a couple things that we're really excited about. Again, creating a green network to support a comfortable, walkable campus. And then finding ways to connect the campus to some of the beautiful assets, the amazingly functional assets elsewhere in the community, the Trinity River, the zoo, and other spaces that we all love greatly. School of Medicine, I talked about that, just an absolute technical marvel and an opportunity to continue to influence the healthcare outcomes of a community that we need to continue to work together to improve those. This is a view of some current construction. We're about to open 2 new residence halls in January. over 300 new beds, which means we can take in 300 more aspiring Horned Frogs, aspiring Fort Worthians into our community, starting as soon as next semester, and a dining facility to serve the entire side of East Campus. Thanks to many on the council for coming out and seeing some of that. We had a couple of hard hat tours, so you've seen it up close and personal, the kind of growth that we're looking to achieve. We are in the throes of strategic planning. Our strategic plan hasn't been updated in about 7 years, but a lot of things have changed in the world. A lot of things have changed in Fort Worth. A lot of things have changed at Texas Christian University in the last 7 years. So we're really, really excited. If all goes well, our trustees will have the opportunity to discuss and approve this new strategic plan as soon as the November meeting, which could make it operational in January of 2025. We're taking a decadal look on 4 topics that we think will help define the future of TCU for sure, and will be additive to the quality of life and the opportunity right here in Fort Worth. Community engagement is one of those pillars, how we work together with those in this room and those beyond the room to bring our faculty and students into the community, how we understand what are the issues and opportunities that we can provide thought leadership, support, service learning, experiential opportunities, internships, full-time jobs that can make Fort Worth stronger. We're going to continue to invest in academic rigor, strengthening what we do from a thought leadership perspective, research, creative activities. We think that's right for not faculty alone, but also our students, because of the skill sets that are generated when you ask questions, when you solve problems, when you communicate with others, and you bring people together. Student-centered growth, working very, very hard to, as we grow the number of students, do it in a way that's focused on their success, and that's success for all of our students. Not just academic success, but wellness issues, opportunities around tutoring, mentoring, connecting with community leaders to make sure they have the best experience and fall in love with Fort Worth the way I have. And then finally, continuing to provide strength in athletics. It's a changing environment, but we know it has historically been important, putting TCU at the national level in many people's eyes as it's a front door to the university, as well as it's a real big draw for many of our students who see TCU as one of the only universities in the country where you can come and have a small private school feel with big-time sports and amenities from a quality of life perspective, all set against the backdrop, and this is their word, not mine, a really cool town. Right? It's a great place to go to college. You all know that if you have any connectivity with TCU yourself or any of our students. It really is, it's an immutable gem that most universities, only a handful in the country, have that small school, big sports, cool town combination. So we have to do all we can to preserve that, to enhance that, and make that a point of pride for all of us. We're very committed to community service. The economic development study we commissioned suggested that TCU, our students, faculty, and staff, the street value of that was almost $18 million of volunteer time in the community. But ultimately, everything we do, the alpha and omega of TCU is the student. They are the ultimate instrument of our impact. Where they go, and hopefully they go right here to Fort Worth, Texas, has everything to do with our success. And I just want to end where I began, which is say thank you, because so many of you have poured in and invested financially, intellectually, from our students and the future leaders that you're pouring into. So with that, I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to take them. And I'm also happy to say thank you and go Frogs.
Thank you, Dr. Pullen. Councilmember Hill, Jared, and then Elizabeth had a question. Okay.
First of all, President Pullen, thank you so much for coming to give an update today. You're doing a great job, and I'm as a Horned Frog 3 times, and actually I'm 3rd generation. It's such a pleasure to see the university continue to grow and blossom the way it has, and it's such an asset to the city of Fort Worth. As we're looking at your 4 pillars, where do you think the biggest opportunity is, or your biggest challenge you see over the next decade for TCU?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity is student-centered growth, being more relevant to a broader section of society in the form of rising college students at the undergraduate and increasingly graduate level, and doing it well. In so many ways, our market is opportunity long and talent short. Right? We need more, capable individuals to build the great companies, to serve on nonprofit boards, to be in our midst, to make sure that our society and our city flourish. And so to do that well at scale, which is what we're talking about doing, is something that we're committed to, but also want to safeguard in a way that we don't lose the soul of what makes a TCU graduate special. Like yourself, a 3-time graduate who's right here in a very formal and important leadership position. How do we do that? How do we create more Macy Hills at scale? So we have to grow, not just to grow, but grow the right way. The riskiest thing is, because it's just so uncertain, is athletics. We live in a world of name, image, and likeness, and the transfer portal, and conference realignment, or conference dissolution, or private equity investing, or super leagues that are being talked about, and on and on and on. College athletics has changed more in the last 3 years than it has in the last 50 years. And so while we can influence some of that, we can't control that the way we can the on-campus environment, or the nature and quality and the academic rigor in our classrooms and laboratories, or even how we invest in communities through our engagement pillar. I can control coming here and saying thank you for the invitation. I don't know if I can control, what an 18-year-old does behind center on a Sunday or a Saturday or now a Tuesday night. That's a little trickier. But ultimately, what we do is about the student. The opportunity for our success is their success. And it's really about all of our success, particularly right here in Fort Worth, Texas. Yeah.
Jerry.
Awesome, President Pullen, great to see you here. Thank you for the presentation. As an alum and a first-year Bright Seminarian, I personally want to say thank you for being so student-centered. I read every one of your regular messages to the student body, and so I'm really grateful for your leadership. To that end, how can we as a city, as alum, as current students, support your student-centric mission and vision for the university? How can we be supportive of the students at TCU?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, first of all, you can be our advocates, our evangelical partners in many ways in the communities in which you circulate. It's one thing for people to see me, and I have stats and figures, but I get a paycheck to work at Texas Christian University, and I love it very much, and I see the goodness every day, but it's a bit expected, right? That's my job. But it's not necessarily everybody in this room's jobs to know those stats and figures, to be able to talk about the pathways and the impact that's being made, and the opportunity that they have to engage and their friends have to engage. So being our supporters is important. If you have opportunities, internships, if you have a desire to mentor, right, to directly impact how someone develops, including expanding their network and in their cool town, you can do that as well. For those of you who have the flexibility for philanthropic giving, of course, we're always looking for support financially. But really, it's about how can we pour into our students to create the next generation of not just college graduates, but the type of leaders we need for our community to thrive.
Charlie.
So, President, thank you for the presentation. Is great information. I'm excited about what you guys are doing. I mean, I was lucky enough to have gone through the executive MBA program there. Of course, I would have the only reason I was able to do that is because of the fact that TCU participates in the Yellow Ribbon program. So I was able to utilize my GI Bill and go there. So for the many veterans out there who would never be able to afford to go to such a great school as TCU, just keep up the great work there.
Yes.
And whenever you talk about growing the school and just expanding some of the opportunities you have, don't forget that now Texas is now the #1 state for veterans, overpowering California. So definitely an opportunity there. And with Fort Worth being one of the top cities for veterans too. So definitely make sure you tap into that market as well.
Yeah, that's well said. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out today, and I really appreciate you providing this update to council. Myself and Councilmember Crane have the luxury of getting to meet with you and your staff on a pretty regular basis to talk about where TCU is going and how that impacts us. I know you have some staff here with you today, and so I didn't want you to leave without me thanking them and thanking you for being such great partners, because you don't just tell us what you want to do. You ask us if if you can be a partner in what the city wants to do. You work with our neighborhoods and our communities to be proactive and tell them what impacts the university is going to have to them. And my personal favorite, as you went through this process, and I told you that there was a stormwater issue in the area, your staff took that and ran with it and has really collaborated with the city to come up with a solution. So thank you for being a good partner to the city of Fort Worth.
Well, thank you so much. And likewise, thank you all for being open-minded to collaborations, many of which are innovative, many of which are, first of their kind. So the more we communicate, the stronger and more frequent the strength of these conversations are. I think the more creative solutions we can drive for the breadth of our community. And the stormwater is a very good example.
Any other questions or comments from council? No. President Pullen, thank you very much for taking the time today, and to you and your staff, we appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay, council, rewind in the agenda. I'll turn it back over to David Cook, who can go over a few presentations or updates for us before we do IRs.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We're back on a normal schedule, maybe. First up, I'm going to call on Richard Zavala, who's going to recognize Parks and Recreation Department. Richard.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Richard Zavala, Park and Recreation Department. The National Recreation and Park Association, which is our professional association in the business that we provide to communities, has an accreditation program, the Accreditation for Park and Recreation Agencies. And through a lot of hard work of staff, a lot of support from policymakers and the city manager's office and volunteers like the Park and Recreation Board, and a pretty significant process of accountability and validation, we are now accredited by the NRPA, and we received that accreditation just a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta, Georgia, at our national conference. I'm going to ask Dave Lewis, the Deputy Director, who really was the leadership on this effort, and he'll introduce a few other folks to tell you about that, because like other agencies, like Public Works, like library, like TCU, there are accreditations, and that makes you solid and makes you improve. So I'll let Dave come up and talk.
Good afternoon, Dave Lewis, Deputy Director. I'd be remiss if I didn't also say a big part of achieving accreditation was the systems and processes put in place over the last 30 years by our Director, Richard Zavala, so thank you for that. There's over 10,000 park and recreation agencies in the country, and only 214 are accredited. So you see it's pretty rare air, and it's really the best of the best. Only about 2% are accredited. This year, 11 new agencies, including Fort Worth, received accreditation, including Baltimore County, Maryland, Memphis, Tennessee. You can see some big, important systems. To get accredited, there are 154 standards that must be met, and those are broken up into 10 subject areas such as human resources, recreation programming, marketing, administration, really outlining the best practices throughout the system. Our process really began in January of 2022, so you can see how long we've been working on this. District Superintendent Sherry Ensley was our department lead for this. I'd like to ask her to stand to be acknowledged, as well as the rest of the park staff that's here that contributed to this accreditation. It really was a really big, heavy team lift that many people helped contribute to. So we had to submit a 125-page self-assessment in April of 2024 that served as the beginning of the process for us with the reviewers, and 888 pieces of evidence that we achieved those standards that were outlined. 3 CAPA reviewers came to our city last June to make sure that we met all the standards, toured our parks, toured our facilities, and really got a great look at Fort Worth. To ensure compliance, we also have to go after reaccreditation every 5 years, and we turn in an annual report that's really just a summary of where we are on a lot of the standards. The benefits of accreditation include demonstrating that the department meets the best practices throughout the country, as well as ensure that staff provide quality customer service, It creates an environment of us being continually improving throughout looking at those standards and best practices set throughout the country. I'd like to share just a real quick 30-second video that we played during the Best of the Best ceremony that we had in Georgia.
Being CAPA accredited is more than a bragging right. It means to be deliberate. It means inclusivity. It means continuous improvement. It means leaving a legacy. We are forward!
So each of the accredited agencies got to show a small clip, and Karen Stumer put this together for us. And I have to say, like, it got a rousing applause, because usually you'd see the director come up and say how proud they are, but we showed that one, and it was really well received. So that was really fun to do. That completes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions about our accreditation.
Any questions for council? Congratulations, and
Thank
thanks to the entire Parks team that's here and those back
Appreciate it.
back out in the
Thank you.
field. Thank you.
Very good. Now I'll call on Dana Bergdorf to introduce our new property management director.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're very excited to fill this important position of Property Management Director, and it couldn't be more thrilled that it's our very own Marilyn Marvin. Marilyn joined the city of Fort Worth in 2011 with a lot of years of experience in leadership positions in both the public and private sector. She's served in our IT Solutions Department. She's served in Neighborhood Services, Library, and most recently as our Interim Property Management Director. That department is very important for as an internal customer service department, because they help departments achieve their capital delivery goals, whether it's for new buildings, such as a new fire station out in Como, or whether it's for a new street project. It's an important partner department, but also an important department to be working with you all and to make sure that you're achieving the goals you have for facilities, for fleet, and for real property acquisition throughout the city. So I'll give Marilyn a few moments. So thank you, Marilyn.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I first want to thank David, Mark, and Dana, and the rest of the CMO team for this fabulous opportunity. I am honored to be a part of the PMD department, and I look forward to moving the department forward so that we can provide service to our customers, including you all. Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Gina?
Congratulations again. But David, I want to acknowledge you as city manager. We were with TML recently, and during the opening session, the general president of the Human Resources Management Association talked about who's in the job market today. And he told us we're looking at people ages early 50s all the way to the 70s. And so I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for that hire, because it shows we do have diversity when it comes to age. And thank you for respecting professionalism, because people who are over 35 still have more to give. And I want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gina. David, do we have last announcements? Nope.
Yeah, it's that time of year. It's the annual United Way campaign. I'm going to call on Carlo Capua to give us an update of what we do here with the city.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Mayor, Council, good afternoon. I wanted to just quickly announce that we have officially kicked off the United Way of Tarrant County Employee Annual Giving Campaign. And last year, we raised $92,000 collectively as a city. So we hope to surpass that. Just a reminder, the United Way supports efforts toward mental health, to combat gun violence, support our veterans, and other key things here in our community. You can give through November 22nd. You can do payroll deduction, we'll have a silent auction, and then 2 key events that will be here in City Hall, at New City Hall. And I'll frame it like this. If you've ever wanted to put DJ Harrell in a dunking booth, then join us on Halloween, October 31st. He has volunteered to be, and I'm not making this up, Drench the Warlock booth. So you'll be able to dunk him and pay, and all the money we raise at the Spooktacular and then the Fall Bazaar will go directly to United Way. We'll have crafts, wreaths, baked goods, games, lots of fun for both events. So we welcome your participation and encourage all employees to give to such a charitable cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. Now we're switching to informal reports. The first informal report is on the 2026 bond program update. And Christiane Simmons is available if there are any questions. All right. The second informal report is estimated actuarial impact of adding MedStar employees to the Fort Worth Employees Retirement Fund. And Deanna Giordano is available if there are any questions.
I don't have a question, but I'd like Deanna to kind of review the high points of that for everyone's edification, please.
All right.
Okay, Deanna Giordano, Director of Human Resources and Civil Service. So you may remember there was a joint meeting that was held between City Council and the Fort Worth Employee Retirement Board members, and that was in May of 2024. And one of the outcomes that Mayor and Council asked is that we look at maybe an actuarial assumption of adding the over 585 employees from MedStar. And so that was conducted by their actuarial consultant, GRS, and they made some assumptions about those individuals, including the pay contribution to the retirement fund, as well as just their classifications and bringing them into kind of the civil service environment and the general employee environment. And looking at the information that they found and the assumptions that they made, what they landed on or what they concluded was with the addition of over 580 employees, that the funding period would be reduced by 3 years. So it's great news. From 32 years to 29 years would be the funding period that would be reduced. Under the Texas Pension Review Board, that funding period should fall below 30 years. And so we were sitting above that 32 years and had to have a restoration plan. So the assumptions predict that that's going to fall below 29. One thing that we need to keep in mind is it doesn't reduce the accrued liability. So the accrued liability remains at 55%. The goal is to have that at 77%. And so ongoing monitoring, the ongoing joint meetings would be critical and crucial to continue that monitoring effort. In addition, some of the other items that were identified is that the annual contributions to the fund would be in upwards of about $9.3 million annually. So all great news to those continued contributions. But again, just making sure that we continuously monitoring it, which we will do through the joint efforts, as well as just with the partnership that we have with board members that are current city employees, and just the outreach that we continue to have ongoing with the Fort Worth Employee Retirement Fund. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go far. The next informal report is on management diversity review. And again, Deanna Giordano is available if there are any questions. Moving on. The fourth informal report is a monthly report on the release of area from our ETJ or extraterritorial jurisdiction. And DJ Harrell is available if there's any questions. All right. The next informal report is on proposed judicial recruitment and appointment process. And our municipal court chief judge Gonzalez is available if there are any questions. We're rolling. The sixth informal report is on recommended revisions to the Fort Worth City Code related to Parks and Recreation. And again, Richard Zavala is available if there's any questions. All right, and our final informal report is an update on recruitment and hiring of sworn personnel in the fire department. And Chief Davis is available if there are any questions. Mayor, no questions. That concludes my report.
Thank you, David. Council, are there any questions on memberships, boards of commissions, or the MNC log that's in your packet? Go ahead.
On number 3 and number 4 regarding the animal shelter, animal donations, I just wanted some clarification on that $750,000.
Councilmember Hill. Actually, we are pulling that M&C and moving it to a November agenda. We're working with Brian and Chris McAllister to get the details behind that appropriation and to ensure the appropriation that we did last year, I think it was in August of 2023, we did an appropriation for $500,000 from the donations fund, making sure that that money has all been spent down just as we're working on this new donation approach. So we will follow up in November and we can find time to sit down with you ahead of that M&C.
Thank you, Valerie. Any other questions, council? Okay, if not, let's move an update on the crime lab, and Chief Neil Noakes will lead this discussion.
Mayor and Council, Neil Noakes, Chief of Police for the Fort Worth Police Department. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come here today to give an update on the status of sexual assault kit testing at the Fort Worth Police Department Crime Lab. As you know, this is completely unacceptable, the situation we're in right now. We know it is completely unacceptable where we are. We understand the urgency in correcting this problem and setting things right going forward so we never have to come across a situation like this again. And we are looking at every single option available to us. When I think about the survivors of sexual assault and what they have gone through, when I think about the fact that they've had to be brave enough to come to us to report these crimes, they've had to be strong enough to basically relive the trauma as they're telling us in detail what happened to them. And then the courage it takes to go to court, to sit there and testify in front of the person who may have committed the crime, because you want justice. You want to hold this person accountable. You want to do everything you can to make sure this person is never able to do this to another person again. And the sad fact is, I look across the room here, we have people that will be watching at home. A good number of them know someone. They have a loved one who's been a victim of a sexual assault or may be victims themselves. And they're pissed off. And they should be. I'm pissed off. If this was my daughter, my wife, my mother, I would be as well. What we're going to talk about today is where we are. We're going to talk about what we've done and what we're going to do going forward to make sure this never happens again. We're going to talk about some of the difficulties that we've faced along the way, but please make no mistake, these are not attempts to make excuses. These are not attempts to justify the current situation we're in, because there is no justification for the situation that we're in. Lastly, this is not an attempt to place responsibility on anyone or anything else. I take full responsibility for the situation we're in right now, and I take full responsibility for correcting this and getting this right. I want you to know that every member of the crime lab, all the way up through the chain of command, all the way to me, we are 100% committed to looking at every option we possibly have to correct this and make sure our processes never allow this to happen again. This is basically what I just said. It's unacceptable. We know the urgency, and we are going to get this fixed. The victims deserve better, and they will receive better. So here's our current status. There are 969 sexual assault kits that have not gone through the complete process to be able to be marked off as complete in the state database called Track It. Of those, 779 kits have already been tested. What we're waiting on now is the review of the testing by our crime lab and entry of those results into the CODIS system, which is the Combined DNA Index System. We'll get into that a little more later. Of the 190 that have not been tested, as of Friday of last week, October the 18th, all of those kits have been sent out to a vendor for testing. Of those 190, 116 were over the 90-day time frame. Our biggest issue when it comes to being able to complete these cases is the CODIS entry, not the testing itself. And the biggest hindrance to being able to get these entries done in CODIS is a staffing issue. Out of 8 forensic scientist positions that we have in our crime lab, we have 5 vacancies. We have 1 is completely trained and certified, 2 that are in training right now. When you add the fact that we have an assistant director who is also certified, we have 2 people who are certified to enter all these tests on their own. A little more about the CODIS entry. CODIS entry is a database where DNA samples can be uploaded so that when a new sample comes in, it can be entered into CODIS to see if it matches anyone else who's already been entered into that system. Of the 779 that have been tested waiting for CODIS, about 600 of those samples have the evidentiary value that is required to meet the standard for entry into CODIS. Of the 179 that don't have enough of evidentiary value, that don't meet the requirements, they can still be entered into CODIS, and those can actually be done even by the 2 trainees that we have right now. Because we have more people working on that part of the problem, we believe we can get that 179 completely done within the next 3 weeks. It's also important to note that since this presentation was completed, we've been tracking everything we're doing every week. And this last week, as a report I received today, we've had 102 additional CODIS entries. So that would bring that 779 down to 677. Now, the majority of cases of sexual assault, as many of you know, involve a known offender, someone that's known to the victim or the survivor. There is no requirement for a detective to have CODIS entry to continue with their case investigation or for prosecution. So it's important to note that even if the CODIS entry has not been made, the detective still receives the results, the detective still continues with his or her case, and prosecution can go forward. The only time that's a major issue is if the suspect is unknown. Then it is critical for us to get that DNA sample into CODIS to see if we can identify a suspect. And we are prioritizing those to make sure they are going in first. These are some of the requirements for the way the DNA evidence is handled. It's in Chapter 420 of the Texas Government Code. And one of the first ones is once we receive a sample that needs to be tested, the detective working the case has 30 days by law to be able to get that in. Obviously, our goal is to get it in much quicker. This is just letting you know how the law explains it. If we fail to submit that evidence within 30 days, we have to send a report to DPS on or before the 30th day it's discovered, telling them it was not submitted in a timely fashion and giving an explanation why it wasn't. If sufficient personnel and resources are available, this is supposed to be completed as soon as practicable. But regardless of the staffing situation, it should not take more than 90 days. And not later than the 30th day after the date the sexual assault kit has been analyzed, the department is to input that DNA profile into the database for comparison. And please understand, these are limits for as long as the law allows. Our goal is to get it done much more quickly. It's also important to note that failure to comply, the only penalty we have there in the law is that we could be penalized as far as receiving grant funding, which is a huge source of funding for the way we get these kits processed. It's also important to note that the law clearly states that even if these are not submitted within the time frame, it does not change the evidentiary value. It can still be introduced as evidence in trial, and it does not affect our ability to access that evidence for investigation. So I mentioned the grant funding that could be paused. We've got a $686,000 grant through the government, and this is a fund that has been established specifically for reducing backlogs when it comes to sexual assault kits. But what I want everyone to understand, regardless of this funding, regardless of this grant, we will find the money and we will get the job done. Currently, we outsource our sexual assault kit testing, and we were able to dig and do a little bit of research. We found that started happening in 2003. We still haven't found out exactly why that happened. We're still looking into it. But since 2003, for the last 21 years, we've been outsourcing the testing portion. Currently, we use DNA International, Signature Science, Bodie, and then the Tarrant County Medical Examiner. There have been questions about the demographics of the sexual assault victims. So most of the information in those reports is protected. Not just anyone can pull up a case and read it, not even me. We respect the privacy of those survivors, and obviously the detectives have access to whatever they need for their investigation. But a cursory look, this is what we've found. So as far as the cases that have not been completely finished, as in being entered into CODIS, about 69% are Caucasian, 28.3% African American, 1.5 Asian, and 1.2 unknown. You will notice there's a glaring missing column here, and that is the Hispanic portion. The reason that is not in there is when we're able to look at the reports, the very little information that's available to, say, for me or one of my assistant chiefs, and they look it up, it will have the race, but it does not list the ethnicity. So we are going back, we're getting with our detectives to pull that information, because that is an enormous part of the city of Fort Worth when you look at our demographics, our Hispanic population. So we are going to make sure we get that, and we get that to you. We just weren't able to get it done before presentation today, and I apologize for that. So this would be a perfect scenario. When we first started using these labs to outsource the testing, it could take a year or more to get a result back. A change was made in the contract with the outside vendors that we used, and we had a requirement that we had to have a response with the results within 60 days. Even with that, that is a long time to wait for results. Were we fully staffed, all 8 positions filled, all 8 positions trained up and certified and ready to go, this would be the perfect case scenario. Now, the serology and the DNA analysis take about 24 hours each. Part of that is because the samples have to sit overnight to be able to get the results that we need to determine that the sample can be used. Once that is done, it's much more quick. The data interpretation by our forensic scientists, the report writing that they do takes about 3 hours. Once that's done, the review of that and entry into CODIS lasts about an hour. And it's important to note, I was talking with our lab director before we came in, when we have the serology and DNA happening, it sits for 24 hours. That means multiple cases can be worked simultaneously. So it's not just one that we can get done in that time period. We can have several that are going through the overnight period so that we can access the information the next day. This is the best case scenario, and this is what we will do when we get staffed up. We currently have the posting out now, closes at the end of this month, and we're not just looking for people to hire and train. We are looking for people who are already trained, already certified, that want to come work for the city of Fort Worth so we get the job done much faster. So here's a summary of the internal corrective actions we've taken. A higher level of oversight, one from me, also from our city manager's office. When it comes to the crime lab, everything comes up all the way to the assistant chief over that area, as well as me. August of 2023, we hired a new forensics division manager, someone else who leads our crime lab, and we have seen significant improvements since that happened. This is obviously one we have to work on even more. We've been able to approve 2 pay raises for these forensic scientists because we found that the reason some left were because the pay was greater at other agencies in our area. I mentioned the posting that we have open right now, and we'll try to hire all 5. I'm hoping we get that many quality candidates. So the 2 trainees that I mentioned before, we plan on having them completely trained up by the spring of 2025, but their ability to enter any and every CODIS entry that needs to be made, that certification will come by the end of this year, which again will help. That will actually double the number of people that we have entering CODIS from 2 to 4. This is the latest one. It's highlighted here. We've also been approved for a $4,000 per person incentive for the members of the crime lab who are going to work on this backlog. So after hours, on weekends, coming in, and as long as they meet certain metrics that are in place, they will receive an incentive for helping us catch up on this backlog even more. What we're looking at right now is a completion date of wrapping up this backlog and doing what should have been done to begin with by April of 2025. We're also looking, though, to hire people on a contractual basis who may have another job at another facility who does this type of work, but wants some work on the side, and they're allowed to by their employer to be able to come in and assist us in getting this backlog reduced. If we are able to do that, if we were able to outsource some of the CODIS entry to some other vendors, then we'll be able to do that even faster. So possible solutions, as we mentioned. We've contacted our existing vendors. We are looking for a legal opinion as well, working with several people to find out if the CODIS entry has to be done by us or it can be done by a vendor. And so we will work with those vendors for that assistance. We've even identified some new potential vendors that we might be able to use in such a situation. And one thing that we looked at was the feasibility of just doing away with that portion of the lab. If it's that much trouble, why not just do away with it and we can send everything to DPS as many agencies do. The sad fact of the matter is, as staffed up as DPS is with multiple labs that they have, even they are struggling with fulfilling this 90-day requirement and or even outsourcing some of theirs. So there is no capacity for that, for us to just shut down and send everything to DPS. Every option is on the table. We have direction from leaders of the city, mayor and council, city manager's office, things we need to look at, things we need to dig further into, innovative ideas, solutions, because failure is not an option in this. Next steps. Continual assessment of contracting possibilities with vendors, anything that we can outsource with a credible, credentialed, accredited vendor we're looking into. Constant reevaluation of our timeline for eliminating the backlog based on what external resources we're able to bring in and the results of the current hiring. We will be giving a weekly report to the city manager's office and council on our progress beginning next week. And our next update will be at the work session on November 5th. I can't say enough how much this hurts us to know that we have hurt others, that we don't want to re-traumatize these victims. We don't want to lose trust with our residents here in Fort Worth. And we're going to do everything we can to earn that trust back. We're going to do everything we can to show that we will take care of this problem, and we're not going to let this happen again. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Mayor Pro Tem Bivens.
Thank you, Mayor. And Chief, I want to thank you for the explanation. I am almost shaking. I'm just very unhappy with this information. But I don't want to be overly emotional. One thing we know for a fact is the DNA capabilities at UNT Health Science Center have been recognized since the attack on 9/11. With that in mind, this afternoon, about an hour ago, I sent an email to the Chancellor, Michael Williams, and copied our city manager and our media czar, Lakin Rapier, asking for help. She later reached out to the president, Dr. Sylvia Trent Adams. I'm calling their names because we need help. And this is, for me, it's a crisis because I would hate to think that I knew someone whose name was on one of those kits. It could be a woman, a girl, it could be a male, you don't know. And so we have been damaged with this, but even more importantly, or equally important, is the fact that the requests from media are not new. I didn't know when I did an interview a week or so ago that these requests were originated back in August. We don't hide from media. We don't hide information. When there's good news, when there's bad news, we have to stand up and talk and be transparent. And so I am very disappointed in that we have not been transparent, and I'm hoping we can get help. Chief, you told me the good thing is we have our own lab. The bad thing is, we have our own lab. I've asked you to talk to legal to see what is it going to take? Can we pause this lab? What can we do so that we never see a situation like this again? And again, nobody is happy with this. And so those are my remarks for the record. And David, I'll be looking to you for a response. Lakin is working as best she can. We've got to get this thing moving. And those are my remarks.
Councilmember Beck?
I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem Bivens' words, and I echo everything that she has said today. I want to make no mistake that we have failed victims in our city. We have failed not just victims, but we have failed their loved ones who have to hold their hand through this process. That is unacceptable. That's unacceptable on so many levels. We all have women and men that we love that have experienced some sort of trauma, and to watch someone go through that and know that their justice has been delayed is heartbreaking. I do appreciate your acknowledgement of how hard it is for these women to come forward and how courageous that must be. I would be remiss if I did not mention two people in the room with us here today. One of them is Miss Lavinia Masters, and that name you will recognize because she is the person that led the charge for this act that requires this testing and this in these timelines. And so if she wouldn't mind standing up, because I would just like to give her a big round of applause for all of the work that she's done on behalf of the women of the state of Texas. Also, Ms. Latrice Godfrey, who many of you saw if you watched the initial reporting. Thank you for your bravery in coming forward. It's one thing to come forward and give a confidential interview. It's a whole nother level to publicly come out and talk about your rape, and that takes a lot of courage. So thank you for your courage as well. Thank you. I do have some specific questions on the crime lab. So the first is, and walk me through, because I've tried to learn as much about this as I can in the time period that it's come up. So we have 30 days from the time that we collect the rape kit from the hospital to get that to our crime lab, correct?
So once the test is done at the hospital, they have 2 days to notify us that the test is available.
Mm-hmm.
Then our crime scene officers have up to 7 days to pick that up, to take to the lab. Usually it's done that night, or that day, or the very next day.
Okay.
Once that happens, once the detective receives that case, that's when the 30-day clock starts.
And are we meeting that 30-day requirement to get that test kit to our lab?
We are. We had not always met that requirement. We were notified in March that there was an issue with that because there was a grant that had been paused, the payment of that grant, because we weren't meeting that deadline. That's when things really started rolling, and that's when we started making the submissions happen. And the last report I got was today, and that was since that time, this 30-day requirement has not been missed.
Okay, so we've known since at least March of this year that there's an issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so do you know how many of those, when you got that notification, do you know approximately how many cases did not meet that, we didn't meet that 30-day mark?
There were hundreds,
Okay.
close to what we have now.
And this is my ignorance on police work, but how, once a detective collects that kit, why would it take more than 30 days to submit that to our internal crime lab?
There is no reason for it not to.
Okay, and so have we internally, have you, Chief, addressed with the men and women on Fort Worth PD that handled this specific type of crime on why we're not meeting that mark and set some goals to how we can better do that?
Yes, ma'am. Once that came to light in March, it was made clear in no uncertain terms that that would not be accepted. It would be submitted within the 30-day time frame, and we're actually going back and reviewing all policies, all standard operating procedures, and when and where appropriate, completely rewriting them if we have to make sure there is no question what the expectation is.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then My next questions really kind of deal with, well, I want to ask before I get into the ins and outs of the crime lab and CODIS. We have victim services for women. Have we proactively, in light of the information that's come out and the sheer number of women that we know are waiting for some sort of answer or closure, have we done anything proactive to engage with those women when it comes to the victim services that we have available to us?
As far as the backlog itself, because the victim services are obviously available to any victim of any crime. We've been discussing with our public relations office, with members of the mayor's team, exactly how that happens and how we're going to do it. It has not started yet, but yes, we're determining the best way to personally reach out to each one of these victims and have that conversation with them.
Can you, when you have that plan developed, can you share that with council as well, just so we're apprised of the plan moving forward?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So then I have some questions about the crime lab. How many other police departments in the state operate their own crime lab?
I asked that question, and to the best of our knowledge from what we've seen so far, it's usually going to be a larger agency like us. It was Houston and one other agency. Can someone help me out? Houston and just Houston. Okay.
Okay. And have we, as of today, reached out to Houston to talk to them about how they handle these and deal with, because if it's a statewide issue, we hear about staffing, and I understand that that's a highly technical position that is hard to find qualified people. Houston seems to be managing it. Dallas, they outsource, but they seem to be managing it. It's unique to Fort Worth PD that we are not managing it well. So have we reached out to our partners to ask them what they have done to be successful in hiring, recruiting, et cetera?
I have reached out to some agencies. Houston is not one of them, but I will correct that.
Okay. The concern I have here is I did a review of the department's social media, and you do a really great job of advertising for our open positions, particularly those for PD, because we know we're short and recruitment takes some time. Not until this issue was brought up, and I went back a year, was there ever a posting for a crime lab position? So that's very worrisome to me, because we knew it was an issue. We knew there was a shortfall, but we didn't seem to place a priority on that. And so my charge to you, Chief, would be to place a priority on this moving forward, which it sounds like you're trying to do.
Understood.
Okay, I want to talk about CODIS. So on the slide, you mentioned that there we go, the majority of the offenders are known by the victim, and there's no requirement to enter into CODIS for prosecution. Can you tell me what the requirement is to enter into CODIS versus those that there is no requirement to enter into CODIS?
I may not have explained that well. Thank you for asking. I probably need to get some clarification. It's not that there's a requirement for it to be entered into CODIS. What I was trying to explain there is the fact that those cases can still continue, even including prosecution, prior to the CODIS entry. There's still a requirement to enter it, and it should be done within the time allotted, and it hasn't always been. But that does not pause the investigation the detectives do or pause the potential prosecution.
Okay, so all of them will go into CODIS eventually, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
As long as they meet the evidentiary requirement of quality of sample, et cetera?
Yes, ma'am, they'll all go in.
Okay. Within the crime lab, there's several functions that they perform, not just DNA testing, but can you tell me what other types of functions the crime lab?
Absolutely, and there's other DNA testing functions for other cases, such as homicide. They also do fingerprint examination. Whenever fingerprints are collected from a crime scene, they work with our gun violence investigators to do analyzation of fired shell casings and rounds that are recovered from crime scenes. Basically, anything CSI, that's what our lab does.
Okay. And do you know if there's priorities placed on the type of activity? Granted, I'm assuming that someone who does fingerprint analysis cannot also conduct DNA analysis. Would that be fair?
That is fair. For instance, our ballistics examiners are trained for that, but may not be able to do DNA or fingerprint
Right, so it's,
analysis.
there's not like a crossover, it's highly specific.
It's very specified. Some may cross over somewhat, but they are routinely very specific skill sets and trainings required.
And let's talk specifically about the DNA folks. People that work on rape kit DNA, and then you mentioned there's other types of DNA analysis that's conducted. Are those the same pool of people?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a rank order? Like, how do you prioritize what work is done first? Is it by type of crime? Is it first in, first out? Can you shed some light on that?
It could be a few different things. It could be the severity of the crime. It could be something where the prosecution needs to proceed for some reason. We've received that communication from the district attorney's office. In the case of sexual assaults, if there's a case that is nearing a deadline, we obviously want to get that through. If it's an unknown offender, we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to get that entry in as well. So it does depend on the circumstances, but what I want everyone to know is right now this is the #1 priority for our crime lab when it comes to those who are entering DNA.
Okay. And we've explored using outside sources to help us shore this up. Is there anything, do they have to be within the state of Texas? Can it be performed outside of the state of Texas? Is that available to us?
It can absolutely be performed outside the state of Texas. Actually, I think 2 of them on this screen are out of state. So we're looking across the country, not just here in Texas or locally.
Okay. I think that's my last, on the slide that talked about oversight, and it said Fort Worth PD and the CMO's office would be involved in oversight. I'd like to also see the OPOM be involved in that as well, because I think this is such a high priority that we need all of those that are involved in oversight in our city to have eyes on this to make sure that we're getting it right.
That is a great idea. Thank you.
All right. I think that's all I've got for right now.
Councilmember Nettles?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chief. I think you articulated a little bit ago, but I wanted to know how many cases monthly or yearly that we're seeing these rape cases come in.
On average, it's about 350 a year, so roughly 1 a day.
Okay. And so with the number that we see, about the 700, we're probably about 1 to 2 years behind.
Yes, sir.
On the, how are our victims notified where the process of their rape case kit is at? Do we notify them personally, or is there a way they can find that information about it?
There's both. Notifications can come from the assigned detective on the case, but the state also has an online resource where a survivor could go on and look at that information themselves to track exactly where their kid is in the process.
Is there some type of database when the officer contacts the individual of their case? Is there some kind of record to show that the individual has been contacted? So we have about 700. Do we have a reporting system to show that we actually contacted them or not?
What should be happening for a detective investigating a case like this, if it's not included in a summary, basically a narrative in addition to the original report, there are case notes that can be added to the reporting system. And I know when I was a detective, if a phone call was made, a letter was sent, if I went to someone's house or interviewed anyone, I put a note with the date and time and a small summary of what happened to make sure I tracked every one of those. What we're doing is making sure our policy will reflect the requirement to add those to their case notes so it is tracked and it is trackable. And we can look and see what the numbers are as far as who's been doing it so far, but we're going to make sure going forward that is tracked in the system.
Okay, and even with the online, 'cause I think it's important if we have some type of tracking mechanism and we start seeing numbers increase, that we're having a problem versus, again, I'm like Mayor Pro Tem, I think all of us here, I first heard about this through media outsource, and they were calling, asking for a statement, and I was like, I actually need to find out information about what's actually going on before I can provide a statement. I was one who did speak, and I spoke from the understanding that we just can't allow this type of oversight or undersight happen within the city of Fort Worth, especially when it comes to victims. I know personally victims within my family who has been raped. Nobody really knows that it can happen until it actually happens to you. So I appreciate your position today, taking the leadership to rectify this situation. I did ask, and I'll ask on the record again, can we outsource those 5 vacancies? Because as you talk about your timeline, I'll give you 2 questions. Can we outsource those 5 vacancies? And then when you talked about the completion date of April 2025, is that also including new cases? Because we're getting a case a day. That means we'll have backlog cases as well as due cases. Is that included in that number as well?
Yes, that is included in that number as well. And as far as outsourcing, one thing I don't remember if I mentioned, well, I did mention that we're trying to hire people who are already trained up, certified, and ready to go. But we've also reached out to different agencies or vendors who have people on staff who are certified, and we're asking if we can hire them on a contractual basis to come in and work in our lab to assist with the backlog. Doesn't mean they even have to leave their current job, but if they want to make some extra money and want to help with this problem, we want to hire them to come in and work with us part-time.
What type of positions are these? Are these sworn police officers, or what type of position is this?
No, these are all part of our civilian professional staff. They are not sworn. Each one will have a bachelor's degree in something related to forensic science. And then if it's someone who's new and has had no training in this type of work, it can take between 2 and 3 years for certification because of all the hands-on training and the certification that's required that they must acquire and maintain from both state and national accreditation bodies, which is one of the reasons we want to try to hire people who actually already have that training and certification so we can cut down on the training and we can get to this backlog even faster.
Right, and so I know you have talked about in other settings that we're understaffed as sworn police officers, and we're looking to get fully staffed it by next year or 2026?
For the lab?
No, for sworn police officers.
Oh, yeah, end of next year.
End of next year. But these positions, that's admin, is not included in that
Correct.
chart.
That's just for sworn positions.
Do we know what other important positions such as these that need to be filled that maybe council can try to make sure we put on our radar to help with as well? Because we're being very focused on getting sworn police officers, but I think these positions are just as vitally important as sworn police officers.
You're absolutely right, and I do want to thank the leaders around this table for always supporting us in that effort, including adding 2 additional forensic scientists to last year's budget. You've already helped us out there. Now it's just getting them hired and trained. But what we can do is a review of all those other positions aside from our sworn positions that are absolutely critical in nature and see what we can do about staffing up in those areas as well.
Thank you, Chief. And I'll just offer up just a personal apology as a representative of the city of Fort Worth to all the victims who may be represented on this slide. Please know that me personally, as a council member, understands and feel for your hurt and do apologize for the backlog of these cases.
Councilmember Williams.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for all the work that you and your team have done over the past couple weeks. I know I've personally asked a number of questions, and I know some of them weren't easy to get the data to. So, thank you for you and your team for what you do. I know just like you and everyone around this table, we stand in solidarity with those who've been impacted, including those who are here. Ms. Latrice Godfrey is a District 6 resident. And, every one of these numbers is a person. And whenever we don't ensure that they get the justice that should be theirs, it affects not only them and their loved ones, it affects all of us. And so thank you and your team for your commitment to being transparent through this process, and also putting on a solutions hat to work with us to see how we can get this addressed to clear the backlog and ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else going forward. Couple questions and then just a few comments. The first question is, are there are there any other types of cases that are being affected by the lab's constraints? And are there any other critical delays impacting investigations and prosecutions that we could be helpful with in this process?
That is one of the things we're doing now, is doing a complete review of the crime lab to look at any of the other areas that we may need to shore up, hire more personnel, have more resources or more support. And I know without a doubt that everyone around this table would support whatever initiative we needed to work on. I'm hopeful that when we come back in a couple of weeks for an update, we can give you some information on that as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Similar vein, beyond the personnel shortages, are there technological or equipment limitations that could hinder the lab's full capacity to support ongoing investigations effectively?
That's one of the questions we asked the lab director, and when I spoke to her about it, she said the city has provided the equipment we need. The city has provided the positions that we need. We just need to fill those positions. So from a technology standpoint, we don't see anything that would hinder the process.
Great, thank you. And just a couple comments as far as next steps and other solutions. I know there's certainly a need to fill these positions, and I would be interested in seeing if there's even a need to expand staffing beyond that, especially given, unfortunately, the amount of sexual assault kits that are coming in one a day is a lot to process on top of all the other responsibilities for the labs. And I know today we're focused on labs, but I'd also, during this process, like us to look at other personnel that's needed to support these type of investigations. You know, our detectives level, do we have enough detectives to handle the volume? And are there any other positions within PD that we need to focus on, especially in bringing offenders to justice? And so whether it's patrol or PD or special task force on this matter, I'd love for y'all to look at that and know that, you know, I'm all ears and would love to support anything along those lines. The second thing that I wanted to just highlight is the communication. Thank you. I know we have talked offline about the need for codifying communication with victims in the SOPs, and so I really appreciate your comments earlier and your team's work to do that. I think it's important that we're proactive about communicating with you know, those who've been impacted in this way, and not put the onus on them to constantly be checking back in. I think there's opportunities for improvement with that communication process. And not only that, but I think our survivors also could greatly benefit from giving their perspectives on where we've missed the mark over the past couple years. And so, you know, I encourage you and the team to engage them to the extent possible in the solution-making process. And I want to commend you on the communication front for the regular reports that your team is committed to with us, and ensuring public transparency throughout this process so that the public knows that we are also committed to making sure we get this resolved. There's an online resource that you mentioned earlier that survivors have to utilize in order to check the status of their kids being processed. And I know this may not necessarily land specifically on the city, but there's challenges that victims have experienced with being timed out of that system. I don't know the exact time requirement, but I think it's 90 days that if a victim doesn't log into that system within 90 days, they get timed out or locked out of their account. And they then have to set up a new account and go through all the process all over again. And so I would love for someone on your team who's way smarter than I am to look into that, to see if there are ways, especially with the legislative session coming up, to see if we can make improvements to that process so that we make it easy for victims and to navigate the process and get regular updates through that system without having to deal with additional frustrations to an already traumatic process. The other thing is, you know, I'm particularly concerned about the implications of, you know, this lab to the prosecutorial process. And particularly, I asked this earlier, but with repeat offenders. And I just really want us to work hand in hand with Tarrant County and the DA's office and to see where are the gaps in the prosecutorial process that we could do better at, especially with the lab and the evidence that's needed for these prosecutions, to ensure that we're not letting folks off the hook from the accountability and justice that needs to be brought to them when they make a heinous crime like this. And so I would like to know how many of the folks, how many repeat offenders are contributing to these specific cases. And then if there's any other issues with prosecution, I think it's important for this body to work with Tarrant County and with our own legal department to see how we can make improvements to ensure that the justice process is actually happening and that we're not standing in the way with important evidence. And so nonetheless, I know we have a lot of work ahead of us. It's important work, and echoing the sentiments of my colleagues, this has to be our top priority. And even if we have to make budget amendments mid-year, I know we just approved a budget, but if there are things we need to amend, I do not want to wait until next budget cycle to fix this. Not only do the victims that are represented in today's presentation need justice as a part of their healing process, but there's also criminals who need correction and who need serious help. And if we allow them to stay on the streets without getting that justice, that correction, and that help, then we are putting more lives at risk by not doing that. So whatever resources we need to ensure that gets done, I'm committed to doing that, and we can't wait until next budget to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Carlos.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. It's concerning news. I think as council members, I don't need to say we're all profoundly concerned about what you presented, what we've learned. Back in 2010, the CCPD board, of which I was a part, allocated funds to establish a crime lab there on the east side of town. And one of the reasons was to have the in-house ability to do DNA analysis, right? As our city grows, so does the need for that analysis as well. It's apparent that not just from a staffing standpoint, but somewhere along the line, we failed to see, at what point we needed more resources, right? I think that's a fair assessment. There is but only one path, and I think you've heard it going around the table, for us to take, conceive of a plan that will fix the process, maintain our certification integrity, and ensure that provisions and measures are in place to prevent this from happening again. I'm going to reiterate my request to see the data of number of sexual assault kits over time sent out for testing, and those including in-house as well, to determine at what point, should we have known that there was an issue building at the crime lab processes. So those are my comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council? No. Chief, a few questions before closing comments on this item. Do you know, and you can get this back to us if it's not off the top of your head, but is a test admissible evidence for the Tarrant County DA's office if it's a known assailant, if it's not in the CODIS system, or is that CODIS classification needed in order for it to pursue a prosecution?
If it is a known suspect, then that CODIS entry is not required for prosecution, no.
Okay. So maybe in the follow-up report you do on the 5th or subsequent to, you can provide a little more detail. And if we need a prosecutor here to kind of walk us through that process, I think that could be very helpful. And there were some questions about that today. The other question for the Tarrant County DA's office I would have is the number of cases we currently see in Tarrant County that result in actual conviction in our communities. And I'll reveal a few important statistics here in a moment that I think are reflective of why I'm asking that question. My next question is maybe also for management and for the police department. We need to demand as council to have a culture of elevation in this city. And what I mean by that is when a department head, an employee, a police officer, a lab technician sees a problem, it is see something, say something. And in this situation, as was reflected in Mayor Pro Tem Bivens' comments earlier, a very simple phone call to someone like Chancellor Michael Williams is very important in a case like this one. And it is unfortunate that it's taken a public outcry and a beautiful victim in Latrice Godfrey, who's here today, to say, help me. And this council and this body This job sometimes is terrible, but what is awesome is the connection point that you can create whether you're a mayor or a council member. So let's remember that. And that goes across every single department. And I know that we have an open door policy, but this crime lab has been a problem in the city of Fort Worth for 10 years. And I mention that, Chief, because it's not just your problem. It is a management problem. And it, at this point now, lies at our feet to solve it. And I can tell by the urgency in the voices of my colleagues that they agree that they're going to solve it. If we're going to have a crime lab in the city of Fort Worth, it will be best in class, period, end of story. And we have a short timeline to achieve that because we've lost the public trust. And importantly, I understand why. I'm also feel like there's a needed apology, not just to the victims that are included as numbers on the slides before us, and including Miss Godfrey and people like Miss Masters, who has very boldly and valiantly fought this battle in Austin. And to Miss Masters, we thank you very much for that. But it's going to take time and attention and personal connection with all the victims that are in the system to make sure they know that they're not treated as numbers. And I know that you shared that empathy that was very clear in your presentation today, and your sense of urgency is greatly appreciated, sir. My next point of information is important, that according to the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, which is really the predominant resource for victims in this country, of 1,000 reported sexual assaults, 310 will actually go to police. What does that mean? 2 out of 3 assaults are never reported in the United States. If you keep coming down that pathway, of the 310, only 50 lead to arrest, 28 are felony convictions, and 25 lead to incarcerations. And in Fort Worth, I know your department and your officers treat this very importantly, but let's elevate this issue because in my opinion, the individuals who are willing to sexually assault another human being are the most violent, sexually deviant in our society. And in Fort Worth, I say never again. And I know that our department can be an example, but we're gonna have to come alongside them with the forensic science needed to prosecute these cases and work alongside the Tarrant County DA's office. So those are numbers, but to me, they are human beings. Each of us around this table probably have friends or personal connections to sexual assault. And while we should never pretend to put ourselves in those shoes, think about those loved ones that you have in your own lives. And I know that all of you have reflected that today. The last point I want to make is around media. And some of this was discussed during executive session. I've known Scott Friedman at NBC5 for probably 15 years. He is a very well-respected journalist. And this goes for every department and our communications department and certainly to PD. When someone like Scott reaches out with a problem, treat them with respect and dignity and follow up immediately. Do not bury the email for 2 months and not elevate it to the chief's office, to the mayor's office. I didn't know about this issue until I watched the report myself on NBC5. And I think most of the people around this table feel the same way. So I have not reached out to Scott Friedman yet, but I will do so. I wanted to get through today's report. But I trust that we're gonna treat these types of relationships much differently, whether it's Mr. Friedman or anyone else in the media, because they are doing their jobs on behalf of innocent victims, specifically like Ms. Godfrey, who's here today. It looks like we have lots of follow-up to come. November 5th will be the first report. I hope the public knows that this council is treating this issue very importantly. It is a top issue that I want management to also pick up the mantle and treat it with the dignity and respect that it deserves. To the victims, we are sorry. There is no better way to put it. But we're gonna be pushed to be better and truly have the very best crime line in the United States of America, or we're not gonna have one. Period, end of story. With that, council, I think that's the end of our presentation today.
Thank you.
Council, I know we have future agenda items. That's the last of our presentations. I know Ms. Hill had one. I'll just work around the table.
Yes, I would like a report from Directions Home and Fort Worth PD on homelessness across the city. I do not want an update on housing. I really want an update on homelessness and vagrants that we're seeing on the streets. I'd also like a crime update on statistics across the city, specific district by district. And lastly, an update from the animal shelter on live release rates and where we are as general now that the new co-compliance director's been on board for several weeks. Thanks.
Yeah. And all those that may see, I think, warrant a presentation, not an IR. Some of those are big ticket items. Councilmember Crane.
can make sense if this makes, to add on to Councilmember Hill's, we've had problems with the cleanup of homeless camps, and I just want to figure out what is the cost of it, of doing that, plus other penalties that we put on the owners if they're not cleaning up the property there. Makes sense if it's part of the presentation or just an IR or just report back. The second IR visited the fire stations that serve District 3, and I just want to make sure they've got some beautiful facilities going in. We did the groundbreaking on 16 last week. But I want to make sure that with EMS and everything else coming over, that we're right-sizing and we're looking forward at what those look like. We also know that, and I know there's some updates coming for some fire stations, but some of them are 40-plus years old. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that as we're moving forward. And also what the replacement of the vehicles look like. Was at one of the stations, 23, they tell me that it's constantly, their truck is constantly being rehabilitated. And when I was there, they had a call and they had to send out the quint. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that and thinking ahead of all of our resources there. And then the last one I want to look at is we seem to have a proliferation of parties that have, it's TCU and the students around it, I get it, but we have portalettes showing up in a large mass on a regular basis. So I want to look at something, getting creative, maybe our overlay or something, the TCU overlay at portalettes, and I've seen pictures, there's dozens of them being delivered to houses. It obviously, there's a balance between the students there and the neighborhood that are there, but maybe something that we can do to give our code some teeth when it's clear they're gonna have hundreds of students showing up, that we can do something about it. So that's the last one, thank you.
Councilmember Larsdorf.
So I think we're all talking about homelessness today. About 6 or 7 months ago, I'd asked for a reporter presentation on any city-owned facilities that could be utilized as a safe place for parking for some of our homeless that are still living in their vehicle. It seems to be, I think a lot of us are just one paycheck away from living in our vehicle in today's economy. So if we can just get an update on where that's at, to see if that's possible. I've befriended a veteran who's living in his truck, and there's a whole community there just living in their vehicle, going from spot to spot. And so if there's other cities that are doing it, they're doing it well. So maybe if we can talk to property management or whoever it is to find out there's something we as a city can be doing better to provide a space for them.
Councilmember Williams. Did I miss you earlier? I'm sorry if I skipped right past you. I was going down the road.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Thanks, Mayor. I just have one informal report. I'm interested to work with Parks to learn more about how we're expanding access for youth to play golf. I know we don't have golf courses in every community, and so, and also I know the benefits of golf, and so just curious to know what programs are available, how much does it cost for our youth to play golf, and my goal is to maybe see if there's anything extra that we could do as a council to ensure that every kid across the city has access to golf.
Is this speaking from someone who'll never get to play golf again with 2 children at home? He's
Yeah,
getting
I don't
another
get to go play
degree.
golf.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll say that for later, but if I can convince my wife and kids to go, my wife will be the designated
2 car
driver.
seats on a golf cart.
Yeah, and 2 car seats on it, exactly.
Very well. Councilmember Peck, go ahead.
So I have a couple. First, I'd like, we did a great job with our boarding home ordinance, but what we didn't do was put in distance requirements like we have for group homes and community homes. So I'd like staff to bring back to us a process of updating that ordinance to include those half-mile radius like we see in our other facilities. I'd also like an IR explaining the distance check process. I'm going through a zoning case now, and it doesn't seem clear which department does the zoning or the distance check. So I think we need to nail that down, and no better way to do that than through an IR. In light of what we heard today, I would like probably a presentation from Fort Worth PD. I'd like to know what crimes disproportionately affect women in our community and what resources we're putting towards those specific crimes, whether it be personnel, victim services, et cetera. And I'd like a comparison of what that looks like to other crimes that we put resources to as well. I want to make sure that we are putting our money where our mouth is and prioritizing those types of highly violent, highly personal crimes that tend to impact women.
Councilor Nettles.
Yes. I have a couple of, one, in August, we moved $370,000 from the Southside Community Center. I meant to get with Fernando before he left, but he's gone. So I really want to make that IR, what that money was, it was intended for, improvements to the Southside Community Center, and was moved to veteran homes. So I want to IR on that. Also, on our vendor process with our mobile trucks that's selling food, been getting some complaints about a lot of our vendors, most of our vendors are going through the process of getting permits to be at like Dream Park or other parks to sell food, but then there's others during the weekend that's just showing up and they're selling food. They don't have permits. And so what is our policy to code compliance? What are we gonna do to mitigate that? Because you have others that are upset that they're paying the monies and other folks are just showing up and they don't even have food handlers, whatever. The next one is loud music and permits. So just like we're having a lot of loud parties over in Ash Crescent, even inside of the parks. I know inside the parks, if you're gonna use a microphone or a speaker, you have to have a permit. So I wanna get some information on that permit process for loud music and parties.
Yeah, they say the best food from a food truck is one that doesn't have a permit. I have convinced my friend, if you don't see a sticker, keep going. You don't know what they're doing. But I do have three. Recently, Mayor, a friend of mine and yours, the AT&T Government Affairs rep, we met with police to talk about copper thefts. And this was a month ago. And so I want to report from the chief on copper thefts. We've even invited the DA's office to this conversation. It's moving further west, real bad in Dallas now. And the week after we met, Dallas had a story about their copper thefts. But when you hear about people losing internet access for weeks and weeks, it's because somebody stole the copper. And so we're also looking at stronger laws, and the chief expects me to make this request, so it's not going to catch him off guard. I do want to report from Development Services. If we are trying or claiming to be a walkable community, I just want to know why we're getting so many waivers for sidewalks from people who want to build. And so I'd like to get a report, on that. There's no real time crunch, but I hate waivers. And so we just need to know, do we have policies in place that need to be modified? Because if you continue to get them, maybe we should tweak the policy. I don't think so. And so I think we need to bring this to the forefront. What's going on with our efforts to be a walkable city? Are we sabotaging our own efforts with these waivers? And the final one is, and this involves code compliance. Anybody from code in here? Val? Okay. I want to report on code compliance, and I want the report to let me know if the case's code is working, come about because a code officer was proactive, or is it primarily in reaction to? And worse than that, there are some people who believe code enforcement practices selective enforcement. For example, you can have a guy who gets written up for a fence and 2 blocks down, the same kind of fence is there and nobody does anything. And so I'll be willing to talk to Val and Brian and anybody to make English out of this, but I want to know what's going on with code compliance, because you can drive by things every day and forget to report them. And then finally I wake up 2 months later and say, oh, hell, I meant to report that. It's still there. And so I don't see proactive reporting. So that's what I have. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one today. So I had an interesting situation with a constituent that reported a traffic hazard in their community, and specifically it was a tree that was obstructing view of a stop sign on one of our major thoroughfares. As we worked to address this, we became aware that it was difficult for staff to propose a time frame for correction, and that there is a dramatic backlog into 800 plus pending service requests. So I would like an informal report on the severity of the situation and the path forward.
Okay, council, that's the last of our agenda items. Meeting adjourned.